Here we are back again, and with me I have Mindy Bruneau here, and we're going to be talking about the Cuban Five. Now, since, it's kind of a complex issue, what I thought I would do is we have a video that we're going to show, and this is Martin Sheen had this video to talk about it, and this will kind of give us the overview of what this is all about. Please stay tuned.
Hola, me llamo Ramon Esteves, a.k.a. Martin Sheen. I have supported the Cuban Five's quest for freedom for several years now, and I will continue to do so, for the simple fact that the Five were on a mission to save lives. The Five never had a weapon. They only had their eyes and ears to monitor extremist organizations and thwart their terrorist plots. During their trial in Miami, the court refused the Cuban Five's motions to move the trial out of Miami to a neutral venue. Now we know, years after their unjust conviction, dozens of Miami journalists were on the U.S. government payroll, unknown to the defense or the court, and at the same time, these reporters were covering the trial in a highly biased manner. From my heroes Nelson Mandela to Jimmy Carter, there is a worldwide and national movement working to bring justice so that the Five can return to their families in Cuba. President Obama, U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder, I appeal to you. The Cuban Five must have a new day in court or be freed immediately. We must hold high the fundamental and cherished right to a trial free of bias. Men who were peacefully stopping terrorism do not belong in jail. President Obama, si puede, free the Cuban Five, and thank you.
Well, that gives us a little bit of an overview of what this is all about. But Mindy, I'm sure, can fill in all those blanks that we have. Tell us about it.
Well, the story really begins with the basic fact that the U.S. government does not respect the sovereignty of Cuba. I think most people know that the U.S. organized the invasion of the Bay of Pigs in the early 60s, which was unsuccessful. And since that time, an economic embargo against the island, travel ban on U.S. citizens going to the island. These things are generally known. But what is not so well known is the fact that our government has also provided safe harbor to terrorist groups of Cuban exiles that are based in Miami that have committed dozens and dozens of, possibly hundreds of atrocities in Cuba and against Cubans.
Wait, but they're here, right?
They're based in Miami. They're walking the streets of Miami as we speak. And they've committed hundreds of atrocities in Cuba and against Cubans and others in U.S. and Puerto Rico who have dared to advocate normalization of relations and so on. The Cuban Five came to the U.S. to monitor the activities of these groups and to thwart them, to pass the information along to the Cuban government to attempt to save lives.
Simply what the CIA does in other countries, right?
Well,
that's okay.
That's kind of another question, but they maintain that this was their mission. When they became aware of a number of the activities that were planned by these organizations, they passed this information to the Cuban government. The Cuban government, in good faith, passed the information to the U.S. government. At the time, it was the Clinton administration.
So they were being open about this.
They were being open about it, and naively so, because nothing was done to stop the terrorists, but the Cuban Five were arrested in pre-dawn raids. An atmosphere of hysteria was whipped up in the Miami media. We now know, as Martin Sheen made reference to, that the FBI actually paid reporters to print inflammatory articles. They could not get a change of venue out of Miami. There's every reason to believe that jurors did not feel that that might have felt that their personal safety was at risk had they not convicted these men. Amnesty International, for example, has taken the position that the Cuban Five could not have received a fair trial in Miami.
Well, and Miami has a large population of Cubans. I mean, which is like there's two sides to the Cuban issue. I mean, you have the people that are in this country that are kind of siding with the U.S. in a way, and you've got the other ones that are sovereign in their own country. So you've got that conflict there, and I think it probably was not a good place to have that.
It was not. I mean, there's a lot of Cubans in Miami who want to see relations normalized.
They should be. Yeah.
But the Cubans in Miami who have money, influence, and are, political connections are the ones who are opposed to the normalization of relations.
They don't want normalization at all? I mean, you think they would have families, or they'd like to,
well,
be able to go back and forth?
It's a class division. The people
okay.
who lost land and businesses and so forth in the very early years of the revolution are the ones who came here and established successful businesses and so forth, are wealthy and prosperous and have never given up their dream of going back to Cuba and ruling it as they once did. And in any case, the trial was not a fair trial. It could not possibly have been a fair trial. The Cuban Five were convicted of various different charges for each of them. Two of them, I should mention, have served out their terms and are back in Cuba. They're still known as the
still
Cuban.
Three.
Correct. They're still known as the Cuban Five, but there continue to be three.
And how successful do you believe that this will be, getting them released?
Well, the international campaign for their freedom has already resulted in reduction of sentences for three of them, and that shows that the campaign is important. It has been more successful outside the United States, I would have to say, than inside.
I was
in
not
Europe,
aware of it. I was not aware of it.
Most people aren't. One of the two that are, when I contacted you to come on the show was just after Fernando Gonzalez, who was the second one of the Cuban Five to be released in late February. And there was a flurry of media attention at that time. They called them the Five Cuban Spies. That's what the mass media refers to them. One of the five Cuban spies was released. So there was a flurry of media attention at that time, and I thought that would be a good time for us to raise it locally. Our organization, AlbanyCubaSolidarity, is organized around four principles: respect for the sovereignty of Cuba, an end to the embargo, an end to the ban on travel, which is really a violation of our rights as U.S. citizens, that we're not permitted to travel to Cuba.
And if you do it, the restrictions are just all over the place, and you have to go in a group, and it's expensive, and
and finally, we do call for freedom of the Cuban Five. I should mention also that in addition to receiving these draconian sentences, they've been very badly treated at the hands of the U.S. Criminal justice system. They spent something like 20 months in solitary.
I know, that's inhumane.
Upon their, after first being arrested. The goal was to break them. The goal was to get them to turn on each other, to plea bargain, and they have maintained their dignity. They've maintained their innocence. They've won tremendous respect from their fellow prisoners, from the prison administrations. They've conducted themselves impeccably. Two of them have, one of them is an artist and one of them is a graphic artist. And currently there are two traveling exhibits of artwork or cartoons by different of the members of the Cuban Five that have been touring internationally to bring awareness about the case of
really
Cuban
good
Five.
idea.
There's a couple of websites you can find information: freethefive.org, thecuban5.org. There's many videos available on YouTube.
Into some of those sites, and they're very comprehensive.
Anyways, we appreciate it. You can write to President Obama. There's information available urging him to take action to free the Five.
And I think we should mention this. This is your curtain of water, which is coming up. Why don't you tell our viewers quickly about that?
Well, Albany Cuba Solidarity is having a series of films and other events to raise awareness about the history of Cuba and the unjustness of the U.S. government's treatment of Cuba. Our upcoming event is an award-winning film called Curtain of Water. It's being held at the Albany Public Library on Wednesday, April 30th at 6:30 p.m. You can reach us also at AlbanyCubaSolidarity@yahoo.com.
Well, you're doing really a great job. I know that we're going to be addressing the embargo with Mabel Leon in a few months or so. It's important, I think, for us. I mean, they're a neighbor of ours, and my goodness, can't we get over this? Well, we're talking 50
People are
years.
suffering. People are
50 years,
suffering
still going
as a
on.
result of these policies.
Right. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
being here, Mindy. It's a pleasure to have you on.